Hello and welcome to an edition of True Audio Files. My name is Jim Carter, and today I'm going to do a sound quality shootout for White Stripes Elephant. As some of you know, and especially if you watched a video that I made earlier this week, Analog Productions just released a UHQR version of Elephant. Basically, their high-end audiophile line of record releases, put on Clarity Vinyl, which is their best formula for vinyl, and pressed at QRP on special record presses at QRP. Before I get too far into it, I had mentioned on one of my videos I was going to talk about Record Store Day as well, so we'll start off with that a little bit. And I mean, as is probably almost always the case for me, I didn't necessarily see a ton of stuff on there. But, you know, I'd say there's a solid 5 to 10 that I think there's a high probability I'll get. I mean, there's definitely some that I'm going to get for sure. The one that probably stands out the most for me is the Prince Get Off promo single reissue. Basically, I think 1,000 of them were made back when they first came out in the 90s, and it was basically a one-sided single. It was intended just to be a one-off song, but it got so popular that they ended up putting a edited version onto the Diamonds and Pearls album, which is actually going to be getting a full super deluxe treatment coming out in a couple of weeks, actually. So, and I got the singles, the 7-inch single limited edition box set a couple weeks ago, and I've listened to a couple of the tracks on that. I think the sound quality is definitely good in terms of a mastering side of things. Unfortunately, the pressings are a little bit to be desired. Unfortunately, the holes are a tiny bit too small. One of the records I got, the Cream single, was way off center. Fortunately, after a lot of email back and forth, or I should say after at least a couple of times trying to contact them, they did respond, and they were able to swap that one out for me. Still was a hair off center, but not anywhere near what the original one was. So I was able to get that swapped out, so I've got at least a playable set of singles out of that. So anyway, so there's that. There's some Charles Mingus band called King Missile, which had a very interesting song called Detachable Penis, if any of you are aware of that. That album is getting a reissue. A couple other ones here and there, but I'd be very curious to see what you guys think and see if there's much of anything that you guys are interested in, and get your take on the this version of Black Friday Record Store Day. So, all right, without further ado, I'm going to go into the sound quality shootout for White Stripes Elephant. So, I really only have 2 copies on vinyl. So the only one I really compared the UHQR to is this one right here, which this is the 10th anniversary reissue that was done for Record Store Days a few years back. It actually has pretty cool vinyl. It's the first record is 2 records, is a red and black split, which kind of looks cool. And then the second record, so it is 2 records, just like the UHQR, with one exception, and I'll get into in a second, is the white one for the second record. So the biggest difference is, well, not the biggest differences. The difference between the two that is noticeable without playing them, besides the color of the vinyl and the packaging, is the UHQR is also cut at 45 RPM as opposed to 33 RPM on the reissue from Record Store Day. I believe that the Record Store Day one was still cut from analog tape, but please correct me if I'm wrong. It is kind of worded oddly because I think it said it was sourced from the original analog tapes. So it's very possible it was, but you know, the more I think about it, the more I think it may not have been, because I believe it may have been cut at URP, although I'm not certain about that. But I know it was pressed at URP, which is probably my least favorite pressing plant out there, and because a vast majority of the records I get from there are just not pressed well. Usually, almost always, there's more surface noise than what you would typically get on a well-pressed record. So anyway, so that was the 10th anniversary Record Store Day reissue. And I did a whole unboxing of this earlier this week, so if you want to check that out, you can. But here is the UHQR. So, very cool packaging, like I talked about in the unboxing video. So, now it comes down to the sound. And just to kind of give you a little bit of a background on how I usually do these videos. This one was a slight bit different, but not a whole lot. I essentially listen to, if it's a new reissue that has come out, to do when I'm doing these sound quality shootouts, I'll listen to that new reissue all the way through once at least, and try to listen to it as a whole. Try to find some songs that I think would be the best to do an A/B comparison with, and then I will do those songs and do a shootout based on those songs. This one was a little bit different, and I'll get into that in a second. But so I played this all the way through first, and it was really great. You had the great driving bass that I remember from the digital versions and the record version that I have here, and it had a good sound stage, good depth to it, in terms of there was not only was the sound stage relatively deep, but there was actually a good separation where there were some instruments that were way up front too, as opposed to way not way in the back, but back. So, and if I had to make any kinds of complaints at all about this reissue, I think there was a spot or two where there was some super minor sibilance issues. Some of you may not ever pick that up. It's something that I picked up on my copy that I was listening to, but like I said, you may not ever pick that up. So, played that all the way through, and I decided we'll just do Seven Nation Army, which is the first track, because I think that had the great driving bass. It had some good, cool little things that I could pick up on, like some spring reverb in the left channel, and a little bit of distortion that from the bass, which kind of oddly was in the front of the right channel, when the bass was kind of in the just off center to the left in the recording. So, but anyway, I decided to try that out, and I put on the 10th anniversary edition. And when I did that, you could clearly hear a big difference, and I was going to do, like I said, typically a couple songs, maybe 3 songs, to kind of do back and forth. But after listening to the first minute or so of Seven Nation Army, I didn't need to listen to several different versions or not several different versions, but several different songs, because it was pretty apparent the differences, and I don't think it would have changed from song to song. And that was one of the things that was definitely noticeable, was the lack of mid-range, or the fact that the UHQR had more mid-range. It was definitely a richer sound to it. The 10th anniversary edition sounded actually a little bit on the harsh side. And, it definitely seemed like, the kind of upper mid-range or lower treble was definitely emphasized more on this cut than the UHQR. The bass was pretty similar. Both had spectacular bass, but there was just some harshness to it. And where it really stood out most of all was on the voice. The voice just sounded shrill. I mean, Jack White's voice isn't the most smooth and warm sounding voice of all times, but because of the equalization on this 10th anniversary edition, it was apparent that it just kind of enhanced that, or made that stand out even more so. Where when you listen to the UHQR, there's more warmth to his voice and just a smoother sound to it, but you don't lose any of the dynamics like of the bass drum, and you maybe lose a little bit on the snare, but again, the snare was probably a little harsh too on the 10th anniversary. But the other really big difference, well, 2 other really big differences are, one, the pressing was obviously not as good, as is the case on most URPs. Definitely was noisy, although for a URP based or URB Boy, try to say that 10 times fast. For URP pressing, it was not as noisy as your typical one of theirs. So, but it was significantly noisier than the clarity, which it should be. But that was definitely what stood out. And also, there was definitely more sibilance, and it was frequent on the 10th anniversary. And I think a lot of that had to do probably with how it was EQ'd and how it ends up getting cut onto the lacquers when you have the EQ set like that. So anyway, that's kind of my take. I would love to hear your take, especially if there's any of you that have a first pressing or early pressing of the record. I'd really like to get your take on it. Everything I've heard out there is kind of the same in terms of what I've experienced. It sounds like the people that I've heard of that heard the first pressings and all subsequent pressings kind of had the same view of them as, they had the sibilance and they kind of were a little on the harsh side, things on that nature. So at least from the sound quality, skipping the pressing aspect, at least the sound quality aspect of it, that part sounds like it's going to probably be pretty similar to all the other versions. But please, if you have a version that doesn't sound like that, let me know, besides the UHQR, that is. So, if you like this album and you have the means to get the UHQR, they're still out there. They're still available. I think they are making 10,000 copies. Get yourself a copy of it if you really like this album, because you will not be disappointed. And one of the nice things about this, a lot of people complain about, 45 RPM and how you have to flip it all the time. Well, you have to flip the other versions too, just as often. So there's no issue with that at all. So both or all versions are 2 LPs, I believe. And so you're going to flip anyways just as often as you are in the UHQR, and you're going to get a much better copy. One thing I also didn't mention, and I apologize, is when I mentioned it on the UHQR, is the soundstage width, depth, I should say. You definitely had a depth as in how far back the soundstage was on the 10th anniversary edition, but it seems like the separation between the instruments and voice weren't as much. And in other words, for example, that distortion I was talking about for the bass was further up in the soundstage on the right channel, and the guitar on the left channel was further up in the soundstage, where in comparison, when like the drums and the bass and the vocals were still as far back as the 10th anniversary. So that is the UHQR, the guitar and the distortion from the bass and the reverb actually were further up in the soundstage in comparison to the 10th anniversary edition too. So anyway, just overall, I don't know if there was anything that I liked better about the 10th anniversary edition. Maybe occasionally the snap of the snare was a little bit kind of nicer, just because it had that extra mid, lower high frequencies or upper mid range, but everything else was just not as pleasant. Like I said, between the pressing, the harshness of the voice, and just everything else. I mean, it's good for what it is. If you can't afford a UHQR and you can find one that doesn't have a whole lot of sibilance, it's definitely not bad, and it definitely sounds decent, but it just doesn't compare to the UHQR. So that is my video for today. I hope you are having a great day. I want to thank you for subscribing if you have. If you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Please do. I love subscribers. If you liked this video, please hit that like button. And again, please leave some comments below or in the comments section, especially if you have done some comparisons of maybe a first pressing of this record and if it's different than what I'm hearing on the 10th anniversary edition. So anyway, that's it. Thank you very much. Later today, or I should say I'm getting later today, the Van Halen box set for basically Volume 2 for the Van Hagar years. I might do an unboxing of that, and I definitely would like to try to do maybe a sound quality shoot on that at some point if I can, although my sound quality shootouts are a little backed up since I've got the Miles Davis one to do as well. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it, and you have yourself a great rest of the day and a great rest of your week.